Hello, everyone. My name is Parker James, and I am the Kids Count Research Associate at the Michigan League for Public Policy. And today I'm going to be presenting on how we can prepare for the upcoming 2020 census. The Michigan League for Public Policy works to advance economic security, racial equity, health, and well-being for all people in every part of Michigan, and we seek to do that through policy change. Our website is www.mlpp.org. So Kids Count is a national project from the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and each state has a Kids Count grantee. So the League is Michigan's Kids Count grantee. And what that means is we collect and disseminate data on kids in the state of Michigan on a variety of different indicators. And then we work with communities to advocate for children and try to improve child well-being in our state. We put out a variety of products throughout the year. We have our data book, and 2019 is available now. That came out in April. And this year's theme of the data book was what it's like to be a kid in Michigan. And we had an art contest. And so I'm going to be featuring some of that artwork throughout today's webinar, as you can see on the right. We produce Kids Count county and regional profiles. So data profiles for every county in Michigan, the cities of Detroit and Flint, and some select regions. The data book and the profiles are on the League's website. We have our Kids Count Data Center, where we post all of the data from the data book and profiles, as well as some additional data. And there's data going back many years, and so you can compare trends over time. We produce a Great Start dataset for the Great Start collaboratives, and we can always complete special data requests. So if there's data that you're looking for and you can't find it in the data book or on the data center, feel free to reach out and we can do our best to get you the data you need. On top of all of that, we do analysis and work on special projects as well. And so one of those that's really important to us is around the 2020 census. And so that's what I'm going to be presenting on now. So just an overview, we're going to talk about why the census is important, why kids get missed in the census. We're going to have an overview of our new data tool and other available data that you can use to help get out the count for kids. We're going to talk about what's being done currently in Michigan. We're going to talk about how we can help get all kids counted. And then I'll give a timeline and give some resources for where you can learn more. So this webinar is being recorded around back to school time, and I think that's a really great metaphor for the census. So, teachers across our state are getting to know their students. And really the first step of that is, going down the list of who's in the class, taking attendance, right? And so the teacher calls out names, and then the students, raise their hands and raise their voices, let the teacher know that they're there. So the census we can think of is really our country's way of taking attendance. And it's really important that everyone is meant to be counted. So just like a teacher would count all students in their classroom, even if they're only going to be there for a few weeks, maybe before transitioning to a different class, it's the teacher's responsibility to make sure all kids are accounted for and when they take attendance. Just like, it's the census's job to make sure everyone's accounted for in our country. And it's also a good first step, just like a teacher needs to learn the names of the students, and count everyone in the class before they can really get to know them and begin meeting their needs. The census is the same way. It helps give a picture of our communities from which we can, begin to address the needs of our communities. So why should we care? Well, like I said, we may have a good idea of what our communities look like and how they've changed over time, and the census really helps to enhance that picture by providing us with data. The census determines funding for many federal programs, over 300 of them, annually, and I'm going to be talking about that shortly. And it's also used to determine political representation and draw districts. So it's really important that we get an accurate count so that we have accurate representation in Congress. Moving on now to talk about the programs that are affected by the census. This chart shows the federal assistance distributed using Census Bureau data in the fiscal year 2015. This is the top 15 programs by the amount of funds that were distributed. So on the left, we see the program name, and then on the right, we see the dollar amount for fiscal year 2015. I've highlighted those programs that I think are especially relevant to kids, but we can see there's also some additional programs here, such as highway planning and construction, $38 billion going to that in fiscal year 15, distributed from Census Bureau data. And so that really drives home the point why we need to count everyone, because these programs are serving everyone in our state. So just to highlight some of those that are, that are especially relevant to children, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, otherwise known as food stamps in the past. We have our National School Lunch Program, temporary assistance for needy families or cash assistance, housing assistance, and then we get to education. $14 billion in Title I grants, special education grants, $8 billion to Head Start. And there's so many other programs, just a couple more here: women, infants, and children, foster care, and child care. There's over 300 programs. These are just the top 15, but we can quickly see how important Census Bureau data is to getting the resources to communities that they need. There are some unique features of our state that we should be aware of regarding the census. 40% of Michigan's funding comes from the federal government, and this is second only to the state of Mississippi. A significant decrease in the count could lead to a measurable decrease in state funding and the possible loss of a congressional seat. So the Michigan Nonprofit Association, which is really taking the lead on a lot of the census outreach efforts across our state, they found that for every undercounted person in 2020, the state will stand to lose approximately $1,800 per person per year. And Michigan is home to a substantial number of residents who are included in historically undercounted populations, meaning they are likely to get missed. So Detroit had some of the highest undercounted numbers in previous iterations of the census. And communities most at risk of being undercounted include Arab Americans, immigrants, the Latinx community, children under the age of 5, rural residents, and African Americans in urban areas, among others. So everyone is supposed to be counted, but the truth is we keep missing kids. In 2010, it's estimated that nationwide we missed 10% of our young children under the age of 5. And that undercount had consequences for our state. It's estimated that in fiscal year 15, $9.7 million was lost due to the undercount. And that was just in 5 programs for 1 year. Those 5 programs: Medicaid, the Children's Health Insurance Program, foster care, adoption, and child care. And as we saw in that chart earlier, there are many other programs that are impacted. And so that 9.7 million is definitely an underestimate of the total amount of dollars Michigan lost out on. So which kids get missed? I already mentioned this a little bit. Young kids, kids of color, kids in immigrant families, kids in families with low incomes, and kids living in hard to reach places are definitely those more likely to be missed than other kids. So why is this happening? Well, isolation is certainly a factor. We can think about geographic isolation, such as kids living in families that live in rural areas that are remote and hard to reach, or children that are living in cities and parts of cities that may be, cut off from the rest of the city, whether that's transportation or culturally, kind of isolated in the city. And then there's also linguistic isolation. And what is linguistic isolation? Well, that's defined as no person in the household over the age of 14 who speaks English fluently. And that's estimated to be 49,000 kids in Michigan in 2017. So if you live in a linguistically isolated household, there are certainly language barriers to participating in the census. But the good news is there are a lot of resources provided by the Census Bureau and other groups to help people take the census that don't speak English. The census form is available in a variety of languages, and there's also additional language guides. Housing is also definitely a factor in why kids end up getting missed. The experience of homelessness or housing instability makes it harder to count people, especially young children. Children often may be living temporarily with relatives or friends, and those relatives or friends may not think that they should include those children on the census. Maybe they're not their biological children, or they're just there for a little while. But if they're living there on April 1st, 2020, they should be included on the census form. Children who are living in larger, more complex households, maybe it's a multi-generational household, or children living with grandparents. Once again, just that issue of people not being sure whether or not those kids should be counted. The answer is yes. The child should be counted if they're living in the household on April 1st, even if it's a grandchild or something like that. And also those hard to reach apartment complexes and housing units can also, be missed. There is misinformation sometimes out there around counting infants, toddlers, and babies. Some people think that, these young children shouldn't be included on their census form, but as long as a child was born on or before Census Day, so April 1st, 2020, they should be included on the form. That means even if, a newborn is still in the hospital on April 1st, they would be counted. And there's a variety of other factors that we want to be aware of. Here's just two examples that I could come up with, but there are many others. So literacy is one. We know that there are, those in our state that have challenges with literacy. And so taking the paper census form, or this year the form's also going to be available online, it does require reading, and so that is certainly a barrier. But the good news is there is also an over-the-phone option. And so for those with, literacy challenges, taking the census via phone may be a more inclusive option. We also know that there is a lack of trust between some communities and the government, due to a history of policy in our country. And so it's really important to be aware of that, be sensitive to that, and speak to why the census is important for all of us, going back to all those programs that are affected, but also talking about how census data is confidential, it's legally protected, and it's not to be shared with any law enforcement or government agencies that are going to be determining benefits or anything like that. So just really talking about how the census data is confidential, protected, and important. There's another factor that you should be aware of in the upcoming 2020 census that's unique. So the census was designed to count all people, not just citizens in our country. And so the federal Trump administration attempted to put a citizenship question on the census. And this was really troubling for census advocates and people that care about getting a complete count, because we knew that the citizenship question would decrease participation among the immigrant community and communities like the Latinx or Hispanic community. And so there was a lawsuit brought, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the good news is the Supreme Court ruled that it was unconstitutional to include the citizenship question on the 2020 census, and the census has been printed and the question is not included. So the question is no longer on the 2020 census forms. They have been printed. That said, we know there's still fear in immigrant communities about completing the census form and the use of census data. So it's really important that we reassure the importance of the census and that data is confidential and protected. So how are we going to do this? How do we count all kids? Well, Kids Count in Michigan developed a data tool to help communities strategize around the 2020 census. It provides data for kids at risk of being undercounted, and it's meant to be used as a starting point for planning and strategizing around getting out the count. So other data may be needed to supplement, and we'll talk a little bit more of that as I go through the tool. So the tool is located on our website, nlpp.org/2020 census. So I'm pulling the tool up now. So here you can see at the top the title, and there's a short blurb here that goes into what I've already talked about a little bit, the importance of the census and how much is at stake. As we scroll down here, we will see the data tool. So it says, how many people in your community are at risk of being uncounted? Use our tool to find out. Young children, children of color, children in immigrant families, and children in families with low incomes are at risk of being undercounted in the 2020 census. Use this tool to find estimates of kids in your county and prepare now to make sure all children are counted. Select your location below. So before we select a location, I'll just walk us through what's on this tool. So the default is statewide data for the state of Michigan, and we have the population of young children. The total is here. And then we have a breakdown by race and ethnicity, because we know that kids of color are especially vulnerable to being undercounted. So we have the breakdown here, and if you hover over, you'll see the number and the percent of children in these different categories. And then we have the breakdown for all children, and the key is up here. And then we pulled out a few kids count indicators that we thought were especially relevant to the census. So we have number of live births to foreign-born mothers, and then we have number of children ages 5 to 17 who are foreign-born in households speaking other than English, and in households speaking English less than very well. And this one gets to that linguistic isolation piece, where there's no one over the age of 14 in the household that speaks English well. And so those 4 indicators here are to help us strategize around those households where immigrants live and where there are people who have the language barriers. And then the last indicator here is number of children ages 0 to 17 living in poverty. So these data are for 2017, and data sources and additional information are all located on our Kids Count Data Center. So I'll give a demo of how this works. I live in Kalamazoo County, so I'm going to pull up the data for Kalamazoo. You can scroll down, and the counties are in alphabetical order, and select Kalamazoo, or you can type to search. So you could type Kalamazoo up there, and it should come up. So after we select our county, this whole table will update for us. So the population of young children in Kalamazoo County is estimated to be 19,030 children. And then we can see a breakdown by race and ethnicity. We can see there's over 1,500 young children who are Latinx or Hispanic in Kalamazoo County. We have a similar breakdown for all children, 0 to 17. And then this table down here also updated. So if I was working in Kalamazoo County on census outreach, and I wanted to know how many, an estimate of children living in households who are linguistically isolated, I could look here and see that there was around 644 estimated children ages 5 to 17 in those households where English is spoken less than very well. And from there, it's really to start the conversation. So from there, we would want to think about who could we partner with in the community? How can we make sure we reach these households, these families, and get them, to participate in the 2020 census? So that's just one example of how you can use the tool. The Kids Count Data Center has some additional information that may be helpful for you. So this tool is not exhaustive. It doesn't have, all of the data that we could use here, but I'll show you an example of how the data center can provide some additional information. So I hope you've seen our data center before. It's datacenter.kidscount.org. And we want to select Michigan on the map, and that's going to take us to Michigan's menu page, where we post all of our data from Kids Count in Michigan. We can search by location or by topic, characteristics. So for this, I'm interested in homelessness. We know that homelessness is a risk factor for being undercounted in the census. And the League just put out an early childhood homelessness report that I would encourage you to check out if you haven't already. We worked with Poverty Solutions at the University of Michigan, and were able to come up with an estimate of young children experiencing homelessness. So when you click on that indicator and you click by county, you can see that there are estimates for 2016 children ages 0 to 4 experiencing homelessness in Michigan. So once again, going to Kalamazoo, I would see there's 707 estimated kids ages 0 through 4 who are experiencing homelessness in Kalamazoo in 2016. So we would know that we would want to, once again, think about who we want to partner with to make sure that we reach those over 700 young children and their families, and begin to strategize using that data. The tool can also be used to help you think about how much is at stake, right? If we know that the state stands to lose $1,800 per year in federal funding for each person who goes uncounted, we can begin to come up with estimates for our county about how much money we could potentially lose if we miss, all of these kids or some of these kids in these linguistically isolated households, or some kids of color, young children. So that's another example of how you can use the tool. We talked about using the data center to find some additional data. You can also reach out to us here for special data requests. We can help try to find you information if you're looking for anything specific. I would also encourage you to work with local partners who may have data or just have experience working in the community. They're going to really be the ones that are going to be able to identify those unique community conditions and circumstances that the data in our tool and on our data center is not necessarily going to provide, right? And I also want to let you know that the Census Bureau has some pretty powerful tools that you can use as well. I'm going to show you the Roam tool. This is Response Outreach Area Mapper. So it's census.gov/Roam, and I like to open it in a separate window here. And basically what this is it's going to show us a map of the whole country. We're going to zoom in on Michigan, and it gives us a map by census tract of those areas with lower response scores. And so that is the percentage of people who have responded, or excuse me, not responded in previous versions of the census or other Census Bureau surveys. So this is a little bit more complex than our data tool that just provides data by county. But if you're really doing the local planning at the local level, it can be a great tool to really identify those neighborhoods, areas that have historically had an undercount and begin to strategize that way. So one thing that I definitely want to point out, our tool doesn't provide data for cities. And so we can see, if we're just looking at Wayne County, for example, it's going to mask a lot of the inequality in terms of census participation. But as we look on to Detroit, we can see that Detroit has, there are a lot of areas with significant low response scores. So if you click on a census tract, it's going to give you this low response score estimate, and that's a percentage of people who have not participated in a previous version of the census. And so the higher the percent, the higher percentage of people who are not as likely to respond. So we can see for the city of Detroit, certainly census outreach efforts are going to be crucial. And then as we look at other cities, we see different patterns where maybe some of the city has pretty high participation rates, and then other parts of the city, do not. So going over to, I'll go back to Kalamazoo. We can zoom all the way in here and begin to plan around, what areas we definitely need to do outreach in. There is a lot of data here if you click on a census tract. So the low response scores at the top, but then there's all this kind of information: population under the age of 5, population 65 and over, people below poverty level. And they also have that indicator around people speaking English less than very well. So this can be a little bit more complicated to use, but like you see, it's a lot more localized. I'm not even familiar with all the different ways we can use this tool, but I definitely wanted to put it on your radar in case you're interested in doing that, really detailed planning. Moving on now to talk about what's being done at our statewide level. The really great news is that our state is pretty committed to making sure that the census, that we get it right, that we get our count right in the upcoming census. So the legislature has put money towards census efforts on multiple occasions, and Governor Whitmer appointed a complete count committee at the statewide level. This committee is going to make sure that we get a complete count and work with regional leaders to make sure all of our kids are counted and that other vulnerable populations are counted as well. So the Michigan Nonprofit Association and the Council of Michigan Foundations have really been the leaders on this, and they have worked with nonprofit partners to create regional hubs. So here's a list of some of those regional hubs. I'm going to show you an updated list here in a few minutes, but just wanted to point out that we can see our community foundations, United Ways. Really, those nonprofit leaders are already, taking a lead on making sure that we get a complete count. So how can we help? Well, we can work with our local hubs to promote the 2020 census. We can work with local partners on outreach, especially those organizations with a focus on populations that could get missed. Some examples may be organizations serving migrant or the immigrant community, faith-based organizations, and we want to get creative. This year for 2020, People can take the census form online, so we can think about setting up census stations. A few laptops, people can take the form online, and really emphasizing that it only takes 10 minutes to take the census, so it's pretty short. Another way we can help is to be unified in our messaging. And the Census Bureau has created a lot of great fact sheets around different populations and how we can be united in our messaging. So here's some examples from their young children fact sheet, and I'm going to show you that is on a web page that I'm going to show you here in a few minutes. But there's naturally going to be questions that come up as we work around the census. So I'm going to go through a couple of those and kind of how we can respond. So let's say we're working, with a family, and the family says, well, my child splits time equally between two homes, or my child lives with another family member temporarily, such as a grandparent. So our response would be that we want to emphasize the census counts everyone where they live and sleep most of the time, even if the living arrangement is temporary or the parents of the child do not live there. And let's say we get a follow-up and say, well, my child really spends 50% of their time here and 50% of their time here. The default is always, where were they on April 1st, 2020? That is Census Day. And so we would encourage them just to mark where they were on that April 1st date. Let's say we meet with a family and they have a newborn child. We would emphasize that parents should include babies on their census forms, even if they're still in the hospital on April 1st. This is another great opportunity to collaborate with service providers, such as facilities providing services to newborns, healthcare facilities, and reminding parents about the importance of counting their children on the census form. We can highlight the fact that the census form only takes about 10 minutes to complete. Parents can fill it out online or over the phone, in addition to paper, at a time that works best for them. We know that a lot of parents, especially new parents or parents with a newborn, are super busy. I doubt that taking the census is going to be on the top of their priority list. So, just those kind of gentle reminders and encouraging people to take it at a time that's convenient. If a child lives in a household that's large, multi-generational, or includes extended or multiple families, we want to remind the person filling out the form to count all children in the household, including non-relatives or children with no other place to stay. And we want to spread the word that the census counts all people living or staying in an address, not just the person or family who owns or rents the property. And here are some tips for messaging tips for working with families who are non-English or limited English speaking, or recent immigrants or foreign-born adults. So we want to conduct outreach, and remember that there are a lot of resources in non-English languages already out there. If you do have the capacity to create a resource that hasn't been created yet, that is obviously very appreciated. But I would just say there are, quite a bit of resources, fact sheets out there for you. I'll show you some examples of that here in a few minutes. We want to encourage non-English speakers to self-respond. The online form and telephone line is available in 13 languages, and language guides are available in 59 languages. We can work with community members to conduct outreach. And we really want to focus our efforts on community gathering places, bringing census outreach to people rather than kind of requiring them to come somewhere. So we can think about local grocery stores, places of worship, small restaurants, really those businesses and community leaders, organizations that are already, frequently interacting with undercounted groups to make sure that, we're doing census outreach in those frequented spots. And we want to emphasize the Census Bureau's legal commitment to keep census responses confidential, especially given the citizenship question controversy. We want to explain the Census Bureau will never share information with immigration enforcement agencies like Immigration and Customs Enforcement, law enforcement agencies like the police or Federal Bureau of Investigation, or allow this information to be used to determine eligibility for government benefits. So with all of that, what's the timeline? Well, there are some key dates here. I would say that the first key date is really now. We can start ramping up our efforts to prepare, start getting people to talk about the census. And October 1st will only be 6 months away. And so I would really encourage us to start using these data tools and coming up with some strategy around, what are we going to do come census time? So in March 2020, census invitations are going to be mailed to households with instructions for how to complete the census. Once again, there's going to be online is definitely going to be stressed this year since it's the first year that it's possible and also hopefully more convenient for a lot of people. But there will be paper form and by phone as well. April through July, there's going to be reminder letters and postcards sent if no response has been received. Since April 1st is really the census date, we want a lot of activity in this period. A lot of people need at least one reminder to take the census. There are, of course, those who are very, passionate and excited to complete their census form. I think I'll be one of those people just because I've, done so much around the census, but certainly that's not the majority of people. So most people will probably need a reminder, and we can be part of that effort, right? By July 2020, that's the deadline for the self-response. The Census Bureau will continue to do non-response follow-up to try to get everyone counted, especially in those hard-to-reach areas. But, it doesn't take, we don't have very much time. So by December 31st of next year, the Census Bureau finalizes the count, delivers that to our federal government, and then states receive our official count basically a year later. So March 2021, a year after census invitations are mailed, we're locked in, and our official counts are the law of the land. So where can you learn more? I want to take us to the Be Counted Michigan 2020 page. So this is the Michigan Nonprofit Association and Council of Michigan Foundation's census initiative. And there are so many great resources here for you. So if we click on the resources tab and scroll down, there's a lot of great fact sheets and informational pamphlets and things like that. So there's Census Bureau information, guides and toolkits I find to be very helpful. There are guides around all these different areas such as counting rural America, counting people experiencing homelessness. Counting young children is the fact sheet that a lot of those messaging guidelines came from. Health centers counts fact sheet, libraries guides. So I would really encourage you to check out the guides and toolkits. But there's so many other areas: social media, presentations, meetings, translations. Here's the frequently asked questions in some different languages that may be helpful for you. Some graphics. Definitely check out the resources tab of the BeCountedMichigan2020.com page. And then another tab that I would encourage you to check out is the Engage page. And on the Engage page, you can sign up for their newsletter. They're going to be providing updates on community events, webinars here. So if you're interested in learning more, there's going to be a lot of great webinars put on by Be Counted Michigan 2020. And then here's the list of updated regional census hubs. You can see there's the name of the hub, the location, what counties they're serving, and then some contacts. We also, of course, have our page, mlpp.org, with our data tool. There's also some additional resources on the right-hand side. I'll point those out for you now. There's a report from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, Be Counted, which is what we were just looking at. We have a blog that I wrote on the citizenship questions, some additional information there. And then Count All Kids is a blog from the Annie E. Casey Foundation, but I would actually really encourage you to check it out. They have a short video that is really great for explaining kind of everything I talked about. It is at the nationwide level, so it's not going to have any Michigan-specific data or information, but it really just explains why the census is important, talks about the undercount of young children and which kids are most likely to be missed, and then talks about what we can do. It's about 4 minutes long, and it's really great to share with people as kind of just a starter, get the conversation going around how can we, count all kids in 2020. We also recently met with a contact from the census. Her name's Rakhi Kapoor, and she's the partnership specialist at the Chicago Regional Census Center. There is her phone number and email address. The census is currently hiring all over Michigan for a variety of positions. So if you know anyone looking for employment, census is hiring. And also they're interested in putting on events in the community, helping people set up complete count committees. You can set up complete count committees at the city level, at the county level. And so I would reach out to Rakhi Kapoor if you're interested in setting up a complete count committee or having the census come to your event, set up a table, have information for people. With that, I want to thank everyone for participating today. And once again, the hashtag for the campaign is #CountAllKids. So feel free to start using that, and please use it all throughout next spring and summer as we work to get all of our kids counted so that Michigan and our communities get the resources that we need, get the representation we deserve, and move forward. There is my email address, pjames@mlpp.org, and our website. I would encourage you to sign up for our email alerts or become a member of the league. Check out all the other great work that we do. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook as well. Thank you so much for joining, and once again, feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Let's count all kids.